Hi, good day once again. This chapter discussion will focus on semiotics, linguistics, and visual communication. And this is looking into some of the definitions and the origin of the theories of semiotics in relation to linguistics and also with visual communication. So let me start by saying that having established the notable lack of analysis of visual communication and its potential interrelationship with verbal mode in economics discourse by economists and applied linguists. This chapter will now examine and review relevant work by semioticians and, of course, linguists working with other forms of communication to analyze the visual mode. This will initially involve a brief overview of the conception of sign and meaning in general, semiotic theory, and then a survey of the main schools of semiotic theory which have attempted to examine concepts, other concepts of and forms of communication, which is utilizing linguistic insights, which is originally deriving from the Saussure's treatise. This review will demonstrate that within this particular theoretical framework, there is also limited research into the nature of intersemiotic relationship, especially in semantic, or the so-called intersemiotic semantic relationship between visuals and verbal modes in texts, and none at all in relation to economics discourse. This is the challenge. The signs and meaning in general semiotic theory, according to semioticians, that semiotics has been variously defined and subdivided into pure, descriptive, and applied areas. And there have been any number of definitions which are available, just like in the work of North 1990, depending on the particular traditions and the particular nuances given to the meaning of notion of semiotics. Across the suite of these various views of semiotics as a theory, a science, or even a fashionable movement, the prevalent feature is that it is concerned with the study of sign. So basically, semiotics is just the study of sign. So this is the general conception of semiotics. A broad spectrum of signs and systems of signs in communities have been studied, whether the subject of the study is verbal, visual, or some composite blend of both. Semiotics has also been applied to the study of verbal visual in the history of the mid to late 19th throughout the 20th century. A number of people are prominent in terms of their role in the development of the modern form of discipline and its major branches. Of these, it is generally recognized that both Charles Sanders Peirce in 1839 to 1914, who is the major figure in the philosophical branch, and Ferdinand de Saussure in 1857 to 1913, who is commonly referred to as the founder of semiology or semiotics and the father of modern linguistics, are the preeminent figures in the development of semiotic theory in this century, and that their uh, differences, their inter alia, and are often characterized largely via their interpretation of signs. This is the basic uh, historical background of semiotics. The signs or the representing object can have any material manifestation as long as it can fulfill the representational function, which is a word, a novel, a gesture, a reaction in the brain, uh, or a city. Yeah, a reaction in the brain or a city of reactions. On the status of the represented object, nothing is made explicit by this definition. It may be material or mental, fictitious or factual, fantasized or real, natural or artificial. So, representation is highly recognizable when you start to know the real meaning of science or when you start studying semiology. The principal functional status of a sign means that it is existence is related to its integration in the concrete process of meaning making. So this is very important. Meaning making, a coded process involving the production and comprehension of signs, which is commonly defined as semiosis. So again, the term semiosis is pertaining to the concrete process of meaning making, a coded process which involves the production and comprehension of signs. Okay, this is taken from Danasi in 1994 and Santaramo in North in 1990, Echo also in 1976. So this has been cited sparingly by the reviewers of this article. The views of Saussure and Peirce as to the nature of a sign and the process of semiosis have been discussed and developed in this century to the point that most of the semiotic literature seems to identify itself with having originated from what has been characterized as either semiology or semiotics. In more recent times, especially from 1969, the International Association of Semiotic Studies has decided to drop this terminological distinction and to adapt the term semiotics to cover all the research published from both the tradition of semiology and general semiotics. Notwithstanding this terminological reproaching, notwithstanding this terminological reproachment, the semiotic literature can still be interpreted in terms of its association with these two major traditions, and it is within the Saussurean linguistic tradition which this study will be situated. It has been recognized by many in this branch that semiotic research and analysis deriving from linguistic theory could inform the interpretation of other communication modes besides language. The Paris School is distinguished by this direct relationship to a development of Saussure's semiological conception of the sign and the influence of Helmslivyan linguistic theory in its central figures is one of the common examples of the illustrations. This school is often characterized as being derived from linguistic structuralism, or often referred to as the French structuralist school, and its members are noted for their work in text analysis, especially for Grimes' school of structural semantics, as well as for their semiotic analysis of a range of non-linguistic modes of communication, meaning and sign, connotation, and on the other hand, involves meanings which are dependent on denotative level. These are also characterized as being derived from the linguistic structuralism, often uh, referred among members as a noted work of text analysis. So basically, semiotic analysis is text analysis of a range of non-linguistic modes of communication. That's the center of the study of French structuralism. There is also a third level of meaning besides the denotative and the connotative that Barthes in 1977 discusses in his study of press photographs and advertisements. This relates to the way the ideology operates through the linguistic message that may or may not accompany the image and raises questions about the nature of functions the functions of linguistic messages with regard to denotative and connotative iconic messages. Barthes states that there are two important ingredients. You have the anchorage and relay, and a dichotomy developed by Barthes in an attempt to address the question of the contextual relationship between images and verbal texts. In explaining anchorage, Barthes envisages a need for the meaning of image to be always related to or in a way dependent on the verbal texts. The function of the linguistic message, then, whether it is in the form of caption, heading, headline, or accompanying reportage or prose, is to fix or anchor the various possible meanings, directing the reader's interpretations and settling possible visual ambiguities and contradictions. These are the basic functions of linguistic messages. In terms of the interpretation of the total message of the verbal or visual text, anchorage, therefore, involves a situation of visual verbal dependency, whereby the verbal text links the image and the situation in the space and time, a relation which cannot be established through purely visual means of expression. Thus, relay in terms of interpretation of the total message of the verbal or visual text involves a complementary relationship between both the verbal and the visual image or constituents. It denotes also a reciprocal association such that each mode contributes to the overall message projected. Vestergaard and Schroeder, in a discussion of Barth's work, assert that the two will picture or text picture relations should not be viewed as mutually exclusive, for there are obviously multimodal text containing both images and verbal text, where either the primary relationship is one of anchorage with some element of relay, or one of relay with some element of anchorage. So meaning to say it's a vice versa. According to Noth in 1990, he developed this point in a brief wherein general overview of research into the picture-text relationships in which the anchorage-relay dichotomy does not obtain, or in which anchorage or relay could be considered as subtypes of other higher order relations. These relationships are listed below with some examples, and it can be suggested that this may apply equally well to other forms of visuals, such as mathematical visuals like graphs, tables, and charts, as well as the photographic image of pictures. So, in the situation of visual verbal dependency, the relationships are suggested to apply equally well to other forms of visuals, such as the so-called mathematical visuals like graphs, tables, and charts, as well as the photographic images or pictures. And there are some strategies how are these visuals being interpreted accordingly. So one of the strategies of interpretation is via illustration. Here, the visual is subordinated in terms of its semiotic function to the verbal text which it illustrates. This is exemplified most commonly in illustrations used in fiction. Some editions of literary works are produced with illustrations, while others of the same work are not, as in, for example, a high school edition of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, compared to an edition sold to the public. The second strategy is pictorial exemplification. This is a subtype of relay, and unlike illustrations, the visuals in pictorial exemplification retain a higher degree of informational autonomy. In relation to the verbal message they exemplify visually. A common example would include the photographs provided in encyclopedias to exemplify the type of phenomena being described or discussed. Next is labeling. Labeling, this involves the affixing of a label to a picture and may be an instance of anchorage as the title or name of a portrait or work of art, or as a type of relay, as in the name given for a person in a portrait or in a photograph. Next is the mutual determination. In mutual determination, this is a mixture of relay and anchorage. The interpretation of the picture is dependent upon the verbal text, but the picture is equally as necessary for the interpretation of the verbal aspect. This is very often seen in advertisements where the two modes are combined via verbally posed questions. For example, can your graphics board do all this for 369? It's a question form, and a set of four pictures connoting, for example, what the board can do in terms of speed, in terms of true color, in terms of video, and in terms of real-time 3D uh, presentation. So this is very common, especially from a PC magazine or in magazine type of presentation or visuals. The fifth strategy is the so-called contradiction. This is rare but involves the presentations of opposite or contrasting messages by both the language and the picture. This has perhaps become more common in recent times with radical graphic design techniques becoming more in vogue, as evidenced by magazines which are constructed in the ways which purposely breach compositional conventions for the effects it can create. For example, here the Pop magazine of Reagan refers to itself as the Bible of music plus style and the end of print. Okay, the Bible of music plus the style and the end of print. Okay, so this is a kind of radical graphic design technique becoming a, a trend or in vogue recently or even now. It can be seen from the above that Barthes was concerned with answering the questions. Thus, the image duplicates certain of the information given in the text by phenomenon of redundancy, or does the text added a fresh information on the image. However, this is a simplification which Noth suggests does not capture the fact that the just the juxtaposition of picture and word usually results in a new holistic interpretation of scriptopictorial or the audiovisual message. Here, it is not simply a question of a text-image relation of addition and duplication, but of the ways in which both the modes work together to produce a unified, coherent, multimodal text. A text that, in Halliday and Hassan's term, is a semantic unit or of form, but of meaning. It is thus a question of the nature of intersemiotic complementary or complementarity. Again, intersemiotic complementarity. As already stated, it is the focus of this study to attempt to describe and account for the ways that this complementarity is realized in the mountain texts. You see? So, although in the next chapter of this book, or yes, this material, it will examine the review on the work of those who have utilized the SFL theoretical framework to investigate various kinds of visual modes. This view will demonstrate that within this particular theoretical framework, there is also a limited research into the nature of intersemiotic semantic relationship between visual and verbal modes in text, and none at all in relation to economics to discourse. The culmination of the reviews in this chapter, the previous and the next chapter, will therefore be establish the need for an application of Hallidayan SFL theoretical framework to multimodal forms of economic discourse. So, with this, although it seems that it's a cliffhanger for the discussion about the Halidean analysis of visual or texts, but for now, I'll park here, and in the next discussion, I'll try my best to continue with the next chapter of this text on semiotics and linguistics. Thank you so much.